Boy returns wallet full of money to rich woman in New York. She ignores him. But hours later, she discovers something that leaves her in tears. Tyler Dennis, a wiry 12-year-old with perpetually tousled brown hair and inquisitive hazel eyes, navigated life in his grandmother Emma's modest Brooklyn apartment with a resilience far beyond his years. Emma, in her early 60s but vibrant and sharp, was the center of his world, her guidance a steady force in the absence of anyone else. Their life wasn't easy, far from it, but Emma's lessons on honesty and courage were anchors that kept Tyler grounded. On his way home from school one afternoon, his mind swirled with thoughts of his upcoming science fair project, a homemade solar-powered radio he'd been building tirelessly. As he rounded the corner near a bustling street, something unusual caught his attention, a sleek black leather wallet lying abandoned on the ground. He paused, glancing around to see if anyone appeared to be searching for it. The sidewalk bustled with pedestrians, yet no one seemed to notice or care. Tyler bent down and picked it up. The wallet felt heavy in his hand, and his curiosity got the better of him. He opened it cautiously. His eyes widened at the sight inside, several crisp $100 bills neatly folded, along with a few platinum credit cards that gleamed under the light. Tucked inside was a pristine white business card that read, "Rebecca Miller, CEO of Miller Enterprises." Tyler's heart thudded in his chest. There had to be over $1,000 in cash alone, maybe more. He swallowed hard, an unbidden thought creeping into his mind. This money could solve so many problems for him and Emma. He pictured her in a brand new winter coat, their rent fully paid, and maybe even some groceries they could never afford otherwise. The temptation was intoxicating, but it lasted only a moment. Emma's voice resonated in his memory, as clear as if she were standing beside him. "We may not have much, but we have our integrity. Honesty is the most precious thing we own." Tyler exhaled deeply, snapping the wallet shut. He didn't need to think twice after that. It was decided. When Tyler reached home, the familiar creak of the apartment door greeted him. The smell of a simple dinner Emma was preparing wafted through the small kitchen. She turned to see him step inside, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his expression serious. "Tyler, is everything all right?" Emma asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Instead of answering immediately, he placed the wallet carefully on the table between them. "I found this on the sidewalk," he said. "It has a lot of money in it. And this." He handed her the business card. Emma furrowed her brow and picked up the card. The moment she read the name, her face shifted, just slightly, but enough for Tyler to notice. Her lips pressed together in a thin line, and her eyes seemed to cloud with something unspoken. A name, a memory, something that Tyler couldn't quite place. "Rebecca Miller," she murmured under her breath. "Do you know her?" Tyler asked, curious. Emma blinked, as if snapping back to the present. "No, dear," she replied a little too quickly, averting her gaze. "But she must be very important. Someone like her probably doesn't lose things often." Tyler tilted his head, unconvinced. "You sure? You looked like you recognized her name." Emma hesitated, a shadow flickering across her expression. Then she smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just a familiar name, Tyler. That's all." Emma's response didn't satisfy Tyler, but he decided not to press her further. Instead, he watched as she carefully examined the wallet, flipping through its contents with an air of focused detachment. When she finished, she closed it firmly and slid it back across the table toward Tyler. "You did the right thing bringing this home," she said. "We'll return it tomorrow." Tyler nodded. "How?" "She lives in Manhattan, and we don't." "I'll give you money for the subway," Emma interrupted, already pulling a small envelope from a drawer. She extracted a few crumpled bills, enough for a round trip. "It's important this gets back to her. I'll write a note for you to give her as well." Her tone was steady, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. Tyler frowned slightly. "Do I have to? What if I just give it to the cops?" "No, Tyler," Emma said firmly, placing her hand over his. "This has to go directly to her." Something in her voice brooked no argument. He nodded reluctantly. "Okay. I'll do it." As Emma jotted down a short note and folded it carefully, Tyler couldn't help but notice the way her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't like her to be so shaken over something so simple, or was it? "Grandma," he ventured cautiously, "is there something I don't know about this?" Emma paused, her pen hovering midair. She let out a small sigh, not looking up. Sometimes, Tyler, doing the right thing isn't just about honesty. It's about courage. And tomorrow, you'll understand why. Her words lingered with him, unsettling and enigmatic. He didn't ask any more questions. When she finally handed him the folded note, he tucked it into the wallet alongside the business card. As Tyler got ready for bed that night, he glanced at the wallet resting on the table. Something about it felt larger than it seemed, like it carried the weight of more than just money. He had no way of knowing that this small act of returning the wallet would change the course of his life forever. Tyler held the black wallet tightly in his hand as he stood at the base of the towering Miller Enterprises building. The structure seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky, its sleek glass facade reflecting a world that felt impossibly far from his own. Inside, the constant flow of sharply dressed professionals, men in tailored suits, women in immaculate heels, only heightened his sense of being out of place. He shifted uneasily on his worn sneakers, clutching his fraying backpack. Still, Tyler reminded himself of what Emma had said. You must deliver it to her personally. The wallet wasn't just a lost and found item to him. It carried Emma's note, and for reasons he didn't fully understand, that seemed more important than anything else. Determined, Tyler stepped inside. The polished floors gleamed underfoot, and the hum of distant conversations filled the expansive lobby. He approached the front desk cautiously, where a receptionist with a professional smile glanced at him over her glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but disinterested. "Yes," Tyler said, holding up the wallet. "I need to see Rebecca Miller. I found this, and it belongs to her." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Mrs. Miller doesn't see visitors without an appointment. You can leave the wallet here, and we'll make sure it gets to her." "No, I have to give it to her myself," Tyler insisted, his voice firm. "It's important." The receptionist hesitated, looking Tyler up and down. "I'm sorry, young man. That's not possible." Before Tyler could argue further, a tall man in a security uniform approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his sharp eyes landing on Tyler. "I need to see Rebecca Miller," Tyler repeated. "I found her wallet, and my grandma said I need to hand it to her in person." The security guard, his name tag read Frank Thompson, crossed his arms. "Mrs. Miller doesn't have time for unannounced visitors. Leave the wallet here and be on your way." Tyler's stomach sank, but he didn't move. "Please," he said, his voice quieter but no less resolute. "It's really important." Frank sighed, clearly losing patience. "Look, kid, this isn't the place for this kind of thing. You can either leave the wallet here, or you can leave the building." Tyler's chest tightened, his frustration mounting. He had promised Emma he would deliver the wallet personally, and the idea of leaving it in the hands of strangers felt wrong. But what choice did he have? After a long pause, Tyler nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he mumbled, his face flushing with defeat. He turned and walked out of the building, clutching the wallet even tighter. Outside, Tyler sat on a bench near the entrance, his thoughts racing. He stared at the wallet, turning it over in his hands. Maybe I should just leave it, he thought. But then Emma's voice echoed in his mind. "Do the right thing, Tyler, even when it's hard." He made a decision. He would wait. If the security guard wouldn't let him in, he'd find Rebecca another way. Glancing at the busy street, Tyler settled in, his eyes fixed on the building's entrance. Hours passed. Tyler's legs grew stiff, and his stomach grumbled, but he didn't budge. Businesspeople came and went in waves, their conversations blending into a dull murmur. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, Tyler spotted her. Rebecca Miller. She was unmistakable, even among the crowd of executives spilling out of the building. She carried herself with an air of authority, her sharp features framed by blonde hair that fell perfectly into place. Her icy blue eyes scanned the street briefly before she headed toward a sleek black car waiting at the curb. Tyler's heart raced. This was his chance. He jumped up and ran toward her. "Mrs. Miller," he called, weaving through the throng of people. "Mrs. Miller, wait." Rebecca turned, her expression flickering with a mix of surprise and irritation. "Yes," she said, her tone clipped. She looked him up and down, clearly puzzled by the sight of a scruffy boy running toward her. "I found this," Tyler said, holding out the wallet. "It's yours." Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she took the wallet from his hands. She opened it briefly, confirming its contents, before looking back at him. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I found it on the sidewalk," Tyler explained quickly. "In Brooklyn." Rebecca's expression remained unreadable. "Thank you," she said curtly, turning toward her car. "Wait." Tyler blurted. "There's a note in there, from my grandma. She said it's important." Before Rebecca could respond, her assistant, Anthony Reed, stepped in. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with an air of efficiency. "Mrs. Miller doesn't have time for this," he said, steering her gently but firmly toward the car. "Wait." Tyler tried again, but Anthony shook his head. "That will be all, kid," Anthony said, his tone polite but final. In moments, Rebecca was inside the car, the door closing with a soft thud. The car pulled away, leaving Tyler standing on the sidewalk, deflated. That evening, Rebecca returned to her penthouse apartment. She tossed the wallet onto the marble countertop and sank into one of the plush chairs by the window, exhaustion pressing down on her. The day had been relentless, and she had no patience for distractions, especially from random boys chasing her down in the street. But something about the encounter gnawed at her. Reluctantly, she opened the wallet again and found the folded note tucked inside. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. "Dear Mrs. Miller, honesty is a lesson my grandmother taught me. I hope this finds you well. Tyler Dennis." Rebecca froze. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes lingered on the last two words, Tyler Dennis. The name struck her like a bolt of lightning, and for a moment, she felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Memories she had spent years suppressing surged to the surface: her estranged son, Michael Dennis, his sudden departure from her life, and the bitter silence that followed. Her hands trembled as she set the note down. "Dennis," she whispered, the name carrying a weight she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Could this boy really be connected to Michael? To him? She stared out the window, the city lights shimmering below, her mind spinning. If the boy was who she thought he was, her carefully constructed world was about to unravel. And for the first time in years, Rebecca felt truly afraid. The next morning, Rebecca Miller sat at her expansive desk in the penthouse, the note from Tyler resting beside her phone. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by the boy who had handed her the wallet and the name that had opened old wounds. The resemblance to Michael had been subtle, but now it seemed glaringly obvious. "Anthony," she said sharply, calling her assistant into the room. He appeared almost instantly, his usual composed demeanor intact. "Yes, Mrs. Miller?" "I need you to find everything you can on a boy named Tyler Dennis," she instructed, handing him the note. "He lives in Brooklyn. Focus on his family." Anthony's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't ask questions. "I'll handle it immediately," he said, tucking the note into his folder. By mid-afternoon, Anthony returned with a folder of information. Rebecca flipped through it quickly, her heart racing as she saw the address scrawled on the final page. The pieces began to fall into place. She didn't hesitate. "I'm going there myself," she said, standing abruptly. "Do you think that's wise?" Anthony asked, his tone cautious. "I don't care if it's wise," Rebecca snapped. "This is personal." The address led Rebecca to a modest apartment building in Brooklyn, its exterior worn but well-maintained. She climbed the stairs, each step amplifying her nerves. She had no idea what she was walking into, whether Emma would even let her through the door. Rebecca hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed in the small hallway, and she braced herself. When the door opened, she found herself face to face with Emma. Time seemed to stop. "Rebecca," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, her expression a mixture of shock and apprehension. "Emma," Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Her eyes immediately moved past Emma to the boy standing behind her, watching curiously. "Tyler." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she took in his features more closely this time. The hazel eyes, the shape of his face. He was unmistakably Michael's son. "It's him, isn't it?" Rebecca asked softly, though her words felt like a declaration. Emma stood frozen for a moment before stepping aside. "Come in," she said reluctantly. Rebecca entered the small apartment, her expensive heels clicking softly against the worn floor. The space was a far cry from her own luxurious home, but it carried a warmth she couldn't deny. Tyler, however, looked between the two women, confusion written all over his face. "What's going on?" Tyler asked, his voice cautious. "Do you two know each other?" Emma hesitated, but Rebecca stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Tyler. "Tyler, I believe I'm your grandmother," she said plainly. Tyler's mouth fell open, disbelief washing over his face. He turned to Emma. "Grandma, is this true?" Emma sighed heavily and sat down on the edge of a worn armchair. Yes, Tyler, she said quietly. Rebecca is your father's mother. Your other grandmother. Tyler's shock quickly gave way to anger. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice trembling. Why didn't I know I had another grandmother? I was trying to protect you, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. There were complications. Complications. Tyler echoed bitterly. That's it? That's why you kept something like this from me? Emma looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Rebecca stepped in, her tone softer than Tyler had expected. Tyler, Rebecca began, I didn't know about you. I didn't even know if Michael had a child. If I had, I would have. You would have what? Tyler interrupted, his voice rising. Come and found me? You're here now, but where were you before? Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but faltered. How could she explain years of neglect, years of prioritizing her career over her family? The guilt she carried was too vast to condense into words. Emma broke the silence. Tyler, I didn't tell you because I didn't trust her. Rebecca and Michael had a falling out, and it drove him away. I didn't want you to get hurt. You didn't trust her? Tyler repeated, his anger now directed at Emma. That's not your decision to make. He was my dad. She's my grandmother. I had a right to know. I know, Emma said, her voice breaking. I know I should have told you. But after Michael disappeared, I just didn't know how to handle it. Rebecca's face tightened at the mention of Michael. Emma, you can blame me all you want, but I never wanted things to end this way. I lost my son too. Don't think for a second that I haven't paid for my mistakes. Then why are you here now? Tyler asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Rebecca knelt slightly so she could meet his eyes. Because I want to make things right, she said firmly. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Tyler stared at her for a long moment, his emotions swirling. He wasn't sure what to believe, but something in Rebecca's eyes seemed genuine. Still, his anger and hurt wouldn't let him lower his guard. Emma watched them both, her heart heavy. This is why I didn't want this, she murmured. I didn't want him to get caught in the middle of all this pain. Rebecca turned to Emma, her gaze sharp. It's not just your pain, Emma. I've lived with regret every day since Michael left. I'm not here to reopen wounds. I'm here to try to heal them. Unbeknownst to them, a black car was parked down the street. Inside, Vince Carter sat with his right-hand man, Leo Barnes, watching the building through binoculars. Well, Vince said, a sinister grin spreading across his face. Look at that. Rebecca Miller, visiting a shabby apartment in Brooklyn? And with such interest in the boy. Leo leaned forward, studying the scene. You think the kid's important? More than important, Vince replied. He's leverage. And leverage is the key to getting everything I want. What's the plan? Leo asked. Vince smirked. We wait. Rebecca's weakness just revealed itself. And when the time is right, we'll use it. Back in the apartment, the tension between Rebecca, Emma, and Tyler was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rebecca stood, brushing invisible dust from her expensive coat. I'll leave you two to talk, she said, her voice quieter now. But Tyler, I hope we can continue this conversation. You deserve answers, and I want to give them to you. Tyler didn't respond, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Emma followed Rebecca to the door. This doesn't mean I trust you, Emma said quietly as she opened the door. I didn't expect you to, Rebecca replied. But I'm not giving up. As the door clicked shut behind her, Rebecca exhaled shakily. The meeting hadn't gone the way she hoped, but it was a start. Little did she know, her presence had already drawn the attention of a far greater threat. That evening, Emma handed Tyler a few crumpled bills and a simple request. We're out of milk, sweetheart. Can you run to the store for me? Sure, Grandma, Tyler replied, grabbing his coat and heading out. The errand was routine, a short walk to the corner store, in and out. Yet as he stepped onto the quiet street, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to the tension from the earlier conversation with Rebecca. As he approached the small, dimly lit store, a black sedan slowly pulled up alongside him, its windows tinted dark enough to conceal the occupants. Tyler froze, his instincts on high alert. The passenger side window rolled down smoothly, revealing a man with a cold, calculating expression. Hey kid, the man said, leaning slightly out of the window. It was Leo Barnes, Vince Carter's trusted enforcer. "Rebecca sent me to pick you up. She's got a surprise planned for your grandma." Tyler took a step back, his brow furrowed in confusion. "She didn't say anything about that," he replied cautiously. Leo's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's because it's a surprise," he said smoothly, his tone almost patronizing. "Come on, get in. We don't have all night." Tyler's instinct screamed at him to run, but he didn't want to make a rash decision. He glanced around the street, but it was deserted. "I think I'll call her first," he said, gripping his phone in his pocket. Leo's smile vanished. "There's no need for that, kid," he said, his voice hardening. "Just get in the car." Tyler took another step back. "No. I'll walk home instead," he said firmly, turning toward the store. Before he could take more than a few steps, the car door swung open, and two men emerged from the vehicle. They moved quickly, grabbing Tyler before he could scream. He struggled, kicking and shouting, but their grip was ironclad. One of them clamped a hand over his mouth, muffling his cries as they shoved him into the back seat. The door slammed shut, and the car sped away into the night. Back at her penthouse, Rebecca paced the floor, unable to shake the gnawing sense that something was wrong. She had been trying to piece together a plan to reconnect with Tyler, but her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ring of her phone. She answered without looking at the caller ID. "Hello." "Hello, Rebecca," a voice drawled on the other end. It was Vince Carter, his tone laced with malice. Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Vince," she said, her voice sharp. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," Vince replied smoothly. "Your company. Your legacy. And now, I've got the perfect leverage to get it." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you talking about?" There was a brief pause, and then Vince delivered the blow. "I have your grandson. If you want to see him alive, you'll sign over Miller Enterprises to me. No tricks, no police." Rebecca gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "You're lying," she said, though her voice wavered. "Oh, I never lie about these things," Vince said, a cruel chuckle in his voice. "You have 24 hours. I'll be in touch." The line went dead. Rebecca stared at the phone, her mind racing. She couldn't lose Tyler, not after everything. She turned to Emma, who had been sitting on the couch, knitting quietly. The look on Rebecca's face made Emma drop her needles. "What happened?" Emma asked, standing quickly. "They have Tyler," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she explained the phone call. Emma's face paled. "That monster." "Vince?" she asked, and when Rebecca nodded, Emma took a steadying breath. "We have to call the police." Vince said no police, Rebecca replied. "He'll hurt Tyler if we don't do what he says." Emma grabbed Rebecca's shoulders firmly. "Rebecca, listen to me. If we don't call the police, he'll hurt Tyler anyway. Vince doesn't play fair. We need help." Rebecca hesitated, her mind a storm of emotions. Finally, she nodded. "You're right. I'll call someone I trust." Minutes later, Rebecca was on the phone with Detective James Parker, a seasoned investigator and an old friend of hers. She quickly explained the situation, leaving out no detail. "Rebecca, I'm glad you called," Parker said, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll handle this. Vince is dangerous, but he's not untouchable. What do you need me to do?" Rebecca asked, desperate for a plan. "First, stay calm," Parker instructed. "We'll trace Vince's location, but we need time. Don't make any sudden moves. And if he contacts you again, stall him. Every second counts." Rebecca hung up, turning back to Emma. "Detective Parker is on it," she said, though her hands still trembled. Emma sat down heavily, burying her face in her hands. "I should have gone with him," she murmured. "This is my fault." "No, Emma," Rebecca said firmly, sitting beside her. "This is Vince's fault. And we're going to get Tyler back." Meanwhile, Tyler sat in the back seat of the car, his heart racing. His hands were bound, but his mind worked furiously to find a way out. He knew Emma would worry when he didn't come back, and he clung to the hope that Rebecca might figure out what had happened. He just had to stay calm and alert. The car eventually stopped in front of a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Leo and the other men dragged Tyler out and led him inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, and the dim lighting made the shadows seem alive. Leo shoved Tyler into a chair and loomed over him. "Sit tight, kid," he said gruffly. "This'll all be over soon. Why are you doing this?" Tyler demanded, his voice shaking but defiant. "Nothing personal," Leo replied with a smirk. "Just business." Tyler glared at him, refusing to show the fear coursing through him. "Think," he told himself. "There has to be a way out of this." Back in the penthouse, Rebecca's phone buzzed again. It was Vince. "Rebecca," he said smoothly. "Have you made your decision?" "Vince, listen to me," Rebecca said, keeping her voice steady. "This isn't necessary. I can give you money, anything you want, but you have to let him go." "I already told you what I want," Vince said coldly. "Miller Enterprises. And if you don't cooperate, well, let's just say your grandson won't make it home." Rebecca's nails dug into her palm. "You'll get what you want," she said, forcing herself to sound defeated. "Just give me a little more time." "You have until tomorrow," Vince replied. "Don't disappoint me." As the call ended, Rebecca looked at Emma and Parker, who had arrived moments earlier. "He's playing games," she said, her voice trembling. "But we're going to end them." Detective Parker nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll find Tyler. And we'll make sure Vince never does this again." Tyler's escape, however, would need to come from his own resourcefulness. Little did Vince or Rebecca know, the boy wasn't planning to wait for rescue. He was already working on a plan. The dim, damp air of the warehouse pressed heavily on Tyler's chest as he sat on the hard metal chair in the middle of the room. His wrists ached from the tight ropes that bound them, and the faint metallic scent of rust mixed with oil hung in the air. He was scared, but his mind refused to surrender. Emma's words from countless quiet conversations echoed in his thoughts. "Courage isn't about not being scared, Tyler. It's about doing what you need to do, even when you are." Across the room, Leo Barnes leaned casually against a crate, scrolling through his phone. Occasionally, he glanced up to check on Tyler, his smirk a mixture of indifference and menace. "You're pretty calm for a kid in your situation," Leo commented, his voice laced with mockery. "Most would be crying for their mom by now." Tyler glared at him, refusing to take the bait. "I'm not most kids," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Leo chuckled. "We'll see about that." Tyler's gaze shifted around the room, cataloging every detail he could. There were two other men stationed near the door, their attention mostly on a deck of cards. A single overhead bulb swung slightly, casting shifting shadows. To his left, he spotted a vent, its metal grate slightly loose. It was small, but maybe, just maybe, big enough for him to squeeze through. He needed a plan. Meanwhile, across the city, Rebecca paced the length of Emma's living room like a lion in a cage. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles white. Detective James Parker stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with his team. "We don't have time to wait for protocol," Rebecca snapped, turning to Parker. "We need to find him now." "Rebecca, I understand your urgency," Parker said, lowering his phone. "But we're dealing with someone who's calculated. Rushing in could put Tyler in more danger." Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "He's just a boy, James. We don't know what Vince is capable of." Parker met her gaze with a grim expression. "We do know. That's why I need you both to trust me." Emma nodded reluctantly, but Rebecca's jaw clenched. Trusting others had never been her strong suit, especially when it came to family. Back in the warehouse, Leo's phone buzzed, interrupting the tense silence. He stepped out of the room, leaving Tyler momentarily unsupervised. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He flexed his wrists against the ropes, testing their give. They didn't budge. He shifted his focus to his legs, which were tied less securely. Wiggling his feet and pulling his knees upward, he managed to create just enough slack to slide one leg free. It wasn't much, but it gave him the mobility he needed. His eyes darted back to the vent. The grate was loose, its screws barely clinging to the metal frame. If he could reach it, he might have a chance. Tyler slid off the chair, biting back a hiss of pain as the ropes scraped against his skin. Crawling on his stomach, he made his way toward the vent, inch by inch, his breath shallow. The men near the door were too engrossed in their card game to notice the faint scrape of Tyler's movements. He reached the vent and gripped the edges of the grate with his bound hands. Using every ounce of strength, he pulled. The metal groaned softly before popping loose. Tyler wriggled into the narrow duct, his shoulders scraping against the walls. pain lanced through him as the sharp edges of the vent sliced into his skin, but he didn't stop. Every inch forward was a victory. Outside, Leo returned to the room to find the chair empty. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the space. "The kid's gone," he barked, his voice echoing through the warehouse. The men scrambled to their feet, searching the room. Leo's gaze fell on the open vent. "He's in the ducts. Spread out, find him." Tyler heard the commotion behind him and quickened his pace, his body screaming in protest. The duct opened onto an alley, and with a final push, he tumbled out, landing hard on the concrete below. For a moment, he lay there, gasping for breath, his entire body trembling. But the sound of shouting spurred him to his feet. He ran. After what felt like an eternity of sprinting through darkened streets, Tyler spotted the glow of a small diner at the corner of a block. He stumbled inside, his chest heaving and his face streaked with dirt and blood. The patrons turned to stare, their conversations falling silent. "Please," Tyler gasped, approaching the counter. "I need help." The owner, a kind-faced woman named Maria Sanchez, rushed forward. "Oh my God, honey, what happened to you?" she asked, steadying him. "They took me," Tyler said breathlessly. I escaped. Can you call the police?" "And my grandma." Maria nodded quickly, her no-nonsense demeanor taking over. She guided Tyler to a chair and grabbed the phone. Within minutes, the police arrived, along with Detective Parker. When Parker called Rebecca to tell her the news, relief flooded her so intensely that her legs nearly gave out. Emma clung to her, both of them crying as Parker's voice crackled through the speaker. "He's safe," Parker assured them. "He's shaken up, but he's okay." "I need to see him," Rebecca said immediately. "We're bringing him home now," Parker replied. When Tyler walked through the door of the apartment, dirty and bruised but alive, Emma and Rebecca rushed to him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "My boy," Emma whispered, her tears soaking into his hair. "My brave, brave boy." "You're safe now," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll never let anything like this happen again." Tyler recounted his ordeal in vivid detail, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Rebecca listened intently, her guilt deepening with every word. She had failed to protect her family before, and it had nearly cost her grandson his life. "I promise you, Tyler," Rebecca said, her voice fierce. "Vince will pay for this. I'll make sure of it." Tyler nodded, his trust in her growing. But as he looked between Rebecca and Emma, he couldn't shake the feeling that there were still things they weren't telling him. The shadow of his father's absence loomed over them, unspoken but ever-present. And Tyler knew that if they were ever going to truly move forward, the truth about Michael Dennis would have to come to light. In the days following Tyler's ordeal, life in the apartment felt heavy with unspoken tension. Tyler, despite his exhaustion and the scrapes lining his arms and legs, carried himself with a quiet strength that both Emma and Rebecca found remarkable. Yet, between the two women, a different kind of weight lingered, an unresolved history that neither seemed willing to broach. Tyler began to notice the silences. They weren't like before, when Emma's voice was the only one to fill the space. Now it was the way Emma's sentences would trail off when Rebecca entered the room, or how Rebecca's gaze would linger on Tyler, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. It finally became too much for him to ignore. One evening, as they sat together for dinner, Tyler broke the silence. "You're hiding something from me," he said bluntly, setting his fork down. His hazel eyes moved from Emma to Rebecca, sharp and unwavering. Emma froze mid-bite, her eyes darting to Rebecca. Rebecca sighed deeply, resting her elbows on the table and rubbing her temples. "Tyler, there's more about your father," Rebecca began, her voice hesitant. Emma placed a hand on Tyler's arm. "You have to understand, we didn't mean to keep this from you. We were just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Tyler asked, his tone rising with frustration. "He's my dad. I have the right to know." Emma nodded, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "You're right, Tyler. You do. It's time we told you everything." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression serious. "Your father, Michael, was an incredible man. He loved you more than anything in this world. But when you were just a baby, he disappeared." Tyler's breath caught. "Disappeared? How? Why?" Emma hesitated, glancing at Rebecca. "We don't know," she admitted. "One day he was just gone. We searched for him. We waited. But we never found him." Tyler clenched his fists. "If you didn't know what happened, Why didn't anyone look harder? Rebecca's voice cracked as she cut in. I did, Tyler. I hired investigators, placed ads in newspapers, begged anyone who might have known something. I turned over every stone I could. But he was gone. The anger in Tyler's chest swirled into confusion. So why did he leave? What happened before he disappeared? The room fell silent again. This time, Rebecca was the one to look at Emma. Emma sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for Tyler's. Your dad and I. We left because of Rebecca, Emma admitted. She didn't approve of me. She thought I wasn't good enough for Michael. That's not fair, Rebecca interjected, her voice pained. It wasn't about you, Emma. I was trying to protect him. Protect him from what? Tyler asked sharply. From my mom. No, Tyler, Rebecca said, her voice soft. From losing everything I worked so hard to give him. I wanted Michael to have opportunities, to succeed, to be everything he could be. And I thought Emma would hold him back. Emma's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. She told Michael I wasn't the right kind of person for him, that he deserved better. It was like I wasn't even human to her. Tyler looked between them, his emotions a storm threatening to spill over. So you fought, and Dad left because of that? Emma nodded, guilt etched into her features. Michael was furious. He said he'd had enough of the control, enough of the expectations. So we left. We thought we could start over. But then he disappeared. Rebecca's hands trembled as she spoke. I was wrong, Tyler. I see that now. I pushed him too hard, and I lost him because of it. And by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. He was gone. The room felt heavy with the weight of their confessions. Tyler sat back in his chair, his thoughts racing. Anger, sadness, and something he couldn't quite name churned inside him. He had so many questions, but none of them seemed to have clear answers. Why didn't you ever tell me this? Tyler finally asked, his voice quiet. Emma reached for his hand again. I didn't want you to grow up carrying our mistakes. I thought it was better if you didn't know. And I didn't even know about you, Rebecca added, her voice trembling. If I had, maybe things would have been different. But I can't change the past, Tyler. All I can do now is try to be here for you. Tyler looked at them both, his emotions still raw. It doesn't make it okay, he said. I deserved to know the truth. About my dad. About everything. You're right, Emma said softly. And I'm sorry. We're sorry. Rebecca's voice steadied. If you have more questions, Tyler, I'll answer them. No more hiding. I promise. He nodded, though his heart still felt heavy. There was so much to process, and the truth they'd shared felt incomplete, like there were still missing pieces. But for now, he chose to let it rest. He needed time to make sense of it all. As the meal ended, Tyler retreated to his room, closing the door behind him. Emma and Rebecca remained at the table, the silence between them charged with unresolved tension. I hope he forgives us, Emma said quietly. Rebecca shook her head. It's not about forgiveness, Emma. It's about making things right. We owe him that. Neither of them noticed Tyler's door creak open slightly as he stood just out of sight, listening. He could tell they weren't done talking, that there were still truths they weren't ready to share. And though he wanted to press them, something told him to wait. For now. But Tyler wasn't the only one listening. Across town, Vince Carter sat in a dimly lit room, reviewing a file on the Dennis family. A sly grin spread across his face as he leaned back in his chair. So, Vince murmured to himself, there's more to this little family than meets the eye. Let's see what they're really hiding. The storm brewing between the past and the present was far from over, and Tyler would soon find himself at the center of truths that could shatter everything he thought he knew. In the dimly lit room of his hideout, Vince Carter sat at a battered wooden table covered with papers, maps, and photographs. The centerpiece of the chaos was a photo of Rebecca Miller, staring at him with her trademark confidence, which only fueled his hatred. Beside her picture was a smaller one, Tyler Dennis, the boy who had become an unexpected complication in Vince's plans. Leo Barnes leaned against the wall, watching Vince with a mixture of wariness and loyalty. Despite years of following Vince's orders, Leo had started to question the man's judgment. Tyler's escape had been a failure that Vince couldn't afford, and the police were closing in. Yet Vince seemed unfazed, his obsession with revenge growing by the day. They think they've won, Vince said, his voice low and deliberate as he leaned back in his chair. He tapped Tyler's photo with a finger. But they're wrong. Rebecca has something she values more than her company, more than anything else. That's the weakness we'll use. Leo crossed his arms, skeptical. And what exactly do you think that is? We've already tried going after the kid, and look where that got us. The cops are breathing down our necks. Vince's gaze hardened. It's not just the boy. It's the truth. There's something she's hiding, something tied to that family. I can smell it. His lips curled into a sinister smile. All we have to do is push the right buttons, and she'll make a mistake. Then we strike. Leo hesitated before speaking. You're sure this is worth it? Going after Miller has already cost us. Maybe it's time to cut our losses. Vince stood abruptly, slamming his fists onto the table. We don't cut losses, Leo. Rebecca humiliated me. She ruined everything I built. This isn't just about the company anymore. It's personal. Leo held his tongue, though doubt flickered in his eyes. He had seen Vince's obsession spiral out of control before, and it rarely ended well. Still, he nodded, knowing there was no use arguing. What's the plan? Leo asked, resigned. Vince smirked. We wait. Let her think she's in control. Let her feel safe. Then we remind her who she's dealing with. Across the city, Rebecca Miller sat in Detective James Parker's office, her posture rigid as she slid a folder across his desk. Inside were documents she had meticulously collected over the years, proof of Vince Carter's involvement in money laundering, embezzlement, and a string of fraudulent schemes. She had always kept the information as a last resort, a safeguard in case Vince ever came after her. This is enough to put him away for years, Parker said, flipping through the pages. He looked up at Rebecca, his expression both impressed and concerned. You've been holding on to this for a while. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap, her face impassive. I didn't think I'd need it. But Vince crossed a line when he went after my grandson. Parker nodded, closing the folder. This is strong evidence, but it's not enough to connect him directly to Tyler's kidnapping. Without that, he could negotiate a plea deal and walk away with a slap on the wrist. Rebecca's jaw tightened. So what do we need? We need him to slip up, Parker replied. If we can catch him communicating with his men, making threats, anything that ties him to the kidnapping, we'll have him. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Whatever it takes, detective. I want this finished. I want him gone. Parker studied her for a moment. He had seen powerful people crumble under pressure, but Rebecca's resolve was unshakable. You're putting yourself in a dangerous position, he warned. Vince knows how to play dirty. He's not going to back down easily. Rebecca's lips curled into a bitter smile. Neither am I. Back at Emma's apartment, Tyler sat on the couch, his laptop open on his knees. Despite Emma's insistence that he rest, he couldn't stop researching Vince. Every article he found painted a clearer picture of the man's corruption, but also his ruthlessness. Tyler clenched his fists as he read about Vince's history of intimidation and violence. Tyler, Emma called from the kitchen. Take a break, honey. You've been at this for hours. I can't, Tyler replied, his voice strained. He's still out there, Grandma. He's not going to stop. Emma walked over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. That's not your burden to carry. Rebecca and the police are handling it. Tyler looked up at her, his hazel eyes filled with determination. It is my burden. He came after me. He dragged us into this, and I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing. Before Emma could respond, Rebecca entered the apartment, her expression grim. She carried herself with her usual air of authority, but Tyler could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. What did Parker say? Emma asked as Rebecca set her purse down. Rebecca exhaled, sitting in the chair opposite Tyler. We have enough to cripple Vince financially, but not enough to put him away for good. Not yet. Then what's the next move? Tyler asked. Rebecca hesitated. She didn't want to involve Tyler any more than he already was, but his determination mirrored Michael's so strongly that it caught her off guard. We wait, she said finally. Vince is smart, but his arrogance will make him slip up. When he does, we'll be ready. Tyler frowned, frustrated by the passive approach. What if he doesn't slip up? What if he comes after us again? He won't, Rebecca said firmly, though a part of her wasn't so sure. Emma placed a comforting hand on Rebecca's arm. We've come this far. We'll get through this together. Unbeknownst to them, Vince had already set his next plan in motion. As night fell, Leo stood in the shadows of a busy street, his phone pressed to his ear. "We're in position," he said. "Everything's ready." "Good," Vince replied from the other end. "Now we wait for Miller to make her move. She won't see it coming." Leo hesitated, his conscience warring with his loyalty. "And the kid?" "Keep him in your sights," Vince said coldly. "If Miller wants to protect her family so badly, she'll have to choose what matters most." Leo ended the call, his stomach twisting. He knew this wasn't going to end well, but Vince's wrath left little room for second-guessing. The game was far from over, and Vince was determined to make the next move count. The morning sunlight filtered into Emma's small apartment as Tyler rummaged through her bedroom closet. He was searching for a phone charger, but the disorganized chaos of the closet revealed more than he anticipated. His fingers brushed against the rough surface of a wooden box, tucked away beneath a stack of old blankets. Intrigued, he pulled it out, dust puffing into the air. The box creaked as Tyler opened it, revealing an assortment of faded photographs, yellowed papers, and letters. He sifted through the contents carefully until one photo stopped him in his tracks. A young man with dark hair and a bright smile stood with his arm around a woman holding a baby. Tyler's heart raced as he studied the image. The man looked familiar in ways he couldn't explain. He stood and walked into the living room, holding the photo out in front of him. "Is this my dad?" he asked, his voice louder than he intended. Emma, seated on the couch with a cup of tea, froze. Her eyes widened as she set the cup down, her hands trembling slightly. "Where did you find that?" she asked. "In your closet," Tyler said, his voice firmer. "So, is it him?" Emma hesitated before nodding. "Yes, Tyler. That's Michael. Your father." Tyler stared at the photo as if it might offer him answers to the questions swirling in his mind. "Who's the woman?" he asked, pointing to the smiling figure holding the baby, holding him. "That's your mother," Emma said softly. "You were just a few months old when this was taken." Rebecca entered the room, overhearing the conversation. Her sharp gaze landed on the photo in Tyler's hands. She crossed the room in a few quick strides and gently took the photo from him. Her fingers traced the edges as she studied it, her expression a mixture of sorrow and longing. "This was before he left," Rebecca said quietly. "He looked so happy here. Like he had everything he wanted." Tyler glanced at her. "Didn't he?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of old regrets. "I thought he did," she murmured. "But I was wrong." Tyler noticed something else in the box, a folded piece of paper with faint handwriting on it. He picked it up and unfolded it, revealing a letter addressed to Emma. "There's more," he said, handing it to her. Emma's eyes widened when she saw the letter, her hand trembling as she reached for it. Before she could take it, Rebecca snatched it from Tyler's hands, her instincts taking over. "Rebecca!" Emma snapped, but Rebecca had already unfolded the paper. "I've never seen this before," Rebecca said, her voice tinged with suspicion and curiosity. Her eyes darted across the lines of Michael's handwriting, her face growing paler with every word. She began reading aloud. "Emma, if something happens to me, take care of Tyler. He's everything to me. Don't trust anyone from my side of the family. There are things they don't know, things that could put him in danger." Rebecca's voice faltered at the last sentence, her hands shaking as she lowered the letter. The final lines were incomplete, trailing off into scratched-out words as though Michael had been interrupted mid-thought. Silence settled over the room like a heavy fog. Tyler's heart pounded as he stared at Rebecca. "Why would he say that?" he demanded. "Why wouldn't he trust you?" Rebecca looked stricken, the color drained from her face. I don't know," she said weakly. Tyler wasn't convinced. "You didn't even know about this letter, did you?" he pressed. "So what was he talking about? What was he trying to protect me from?" Emma stood and stepped between them, her voice shaking. "That's enough, Tyler. This isn't helping." "No," Tyler shot back, his frustration boiling over. "I want answers. You've both been hiding things from me my whole life, and now my dad's letter says I'm in danger? Someone needs to tell me the truth." Rebecca sank into a nearby chair, the letter still clutched in her hand. "I don't know what he meant," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if Michael believed you were in danger, then we need to find out why." Emma sat beside Rebecca, her expression torn between anger and fear. "You don't think," she began, but her voice trailed off. Think what? Tyler asked, his eyes darting between them. Emma hesitated before continuing. You don't think this has to do with Vince, do you? Rebecca's head snapped up at the mention of Vince's name. It might, she admitted. Michael never told me the full extent of his dealings before he left. If Vince was involved, it's possible Michael knew something that could have made him a target. Tyler's frustration shifted to confusion. What kind of dealings? What are you talking about? Rebecca stood abruptly, pacing the room. Michael was working on something important before he disappeared, a project that could have changed everything. Vince had invested in it heavily, but Michael backed out when he realized Vince's intentions weren't ethical. What project? Tyler asked, his curiosity piqued. I don't know the specifics, Rebecca said, but whatever it was valuable enough to make Michael walk away from Vince, and from me. Emma frowned, her concern growing. Do you think Vince is still after it? Rebecca stopped pacing and turned to face them. If he is, then this letter might be the key to understanding why. And if it is, Tyler could still be in danger. Tyler's chest tightened as the weight of their words sank in. So what do we do now? He asked. Rebecca's voice hardened, her determination returning. We find out the truth. About Michael, about Vince, about everything. And how do we do that? Tyler pressed. Rebecca glanced down at the letter in her hand, her jaw tightening. We start by figuring out what Michael was hiding. If there are answers out there, we'll find them. Emma looked uneasy. Rebecca, if Vince is still involved, this could put all of us at risk. Rebecca met her gaze with steely resolve. We're already at risk, Emma. If we don't act, we're just waiting for Vince to make his next move. Tyler nodded, his earlier frustration giving way to determination. I want to help, he said firmly. No, Rebecca said, her tone sharp. This is too dangerous. I don't care, Tyler shot back. He's my dad. I have a right to know what happened to him. Rebecca hesitated, her resolve wavering as she looked at Tyler's determined face. Finally, she nodded. We'll figure this out, she promised. Together. As the three of them sat in the quiet room, the air buzzing with tension and unanswered questions, none of them noticed the small device blinking red beneath the couch, a listening bug, placed there during Vince's last attempt to corner them. Across town, Vince Carter leaned back in his chair, a smug grin spreading across his face as he listened to their every word through his earpiece. Well, Vince muttered. Looks like they're finally starting to piece it together. Too bad they won't live long enough to finish. Rebecca's vow to uncover the truth would set them on a collision course with a past filled with danger, secrets, and betrayal, and Vince was ready to exploit every weakness. Rebecca leaned against the edge of her desk, her mind racing as she sifted through old documents and faded photos spread before her. Each piece was a fragment of her family's history, a history she had once thought she understood. Now, it seemed Michael's disappearance wasn't the only mystery buried in their past. Determined to find answers, she had called William Carr, a private investigator she'd worked with years ago during her desperate, fruitless search for Michael. William, Rebecca had said during their initial call, her voice steely, I need you to look into Michael's life before he disappeared. I need to know who he was involved with, what he was working on, everything. William had agreed without hesitation. I'll need a few days to dig, he'd said. But if there's something to find, I'll find it. While Rebecca awaited William's report, Tyler was on his own mission. The revelations from the letter had ignited a relentless curiosity in him. It wasn't just about his father anymore, it was about understanding the danger that still lingered over their family. He started asking questions, talking to neighbors and anyone who might remember Michael. One afternoon, Tyler knocked on the door of Mrs. Clara, the elderly woman who lived downstairs. She'd known Emma for years and had a habit of watching the neighborhood with a keen eye. Clara opened the door slowly, peering out with curiosity. Tyler dear, she said, adjusting her thick glasses. What brings you here? I need to ask you something about my dad, Tyler said, his voice steady but urgent. Clara's expression softened, and she gestured for him to come in. Her apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books, and Tyler took a seat on the floral-patterned couch. I remember your father, Clara began, sitting across from him. He was such a kind young man. Always had a smile, but, she hesitated. But what? Tyler pressed. Clara sighed, leaning back in her chair. I think he was worried about something. I'd see him walking home sometimes, looking over his shoulder like someone was following him. One day, he stopped to chat with me, and he mentioned a name. A name? Tyler asked, his pulse quickening. Whose name? Vince, Clara said after a pause. Vince Carter, I think. He said he was afraid of him. Tyler felt a chill run down his spine. Afraid of what? Clara shook her head. He didn't say much, only that Vince was trouble and that he was trying to keep you and your mother safe. Tyler left Clara's apartment with his heart racing. His father had known Vince, and not just casually, there had been fear. His mind spun with possibilities. What kind of trouble had Michael been in? Why hadn't anyone told him sooner? He sprinted back upstairs to confront Rebecca and Emma. When Tyler burst through the door, he found Rebecca pacing the living room, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Emma sat nearby, her hands clasped together in worry. Tyler stopped short, watching Rebecca's face shift from focus to pale as she listened to the voice on the other end of the line. Are you sure? Rebecca asked, her voice trembling slightly. No, that's not possible. He would have told me. He should have told me. She ended the call and turned to Emma, her expression grim. Tyler stepped forward. What's going on? He asked. Rebecca hesitated before speaking. That was William, she said, her voice heavy. He found something. Michael and Vince. They had a business relationship before all of this started. Emma's head snapped up. Business relationship? Michael hated Vince. Why would he work with him? I don't know, Rebecca admitted, sitting down heavily. William's still looking into it, but apparently, they were involved in some kind of deal. Something big. Tyler clenched his fists. Clara told me that Dad was scared of Vince. She said he thought Vince was following him. Rebecca's face darkened. If that's true, then whatever deal they had must have gone bad. And Vince doesn't let go of grudges easily. Do you think that's why he disappeared? Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because of Vince? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Emma reached out, placing a comforting hand on Tyler's arm. We'll figure this out, she said firmly. We're not going to let Vince win. Rebecca stood abruptly, her resolve hardening. William's digging into Vince's finances and connections. If there's any proof that ties him to Michael's disappearance, or to his threats against us, we'll find it. And then what? Tyler asked. What if it's not enough? Rebecca turned to face him, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we make it enough. We're not backing down. Tyler nodded, though fear lingered in his chest. He glanced at the photo of his father on the table, the man who had loved him fiercely and vanished into the shadows of Vince Carter's world. Whatever secrets lay ahead, Tyler knew he couldn't stop now. Across town, Vince sat in his office, staring at a photograph of Michael Dennis. It was dog-eared, creased from years of handling. Leo entered the room cautiously, carrying a file. You're going to want to see this, Leo said, setting the file on the desk. It's about Michael. Vince opened the file and scanned the contents. A slow smile spread across his face as he read. So, he muttered. They're finally getting close to the truth. What do you want to do? Leo asked. Vince leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk. Let them dig. Let them think they're in control. When they get too close, we'll make our move. And the boy? Leo asked hesitantly. Vince's smile turned cold. He's the key. They'll do anything to protect him. And when the time is right, he'll lead us straight to what we're looking for. As Rebecca, Tyler, and Emma delved deeper into Michael's past, they had no idea that Vince was already a step ahead, watching their every move, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Rebecca sat at the edge of the dining table, her hands clasped tightly as she prepared to speak. Tyler and Emma sat across from her, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and dread. The weight of what she had just learned pressed heavily on her shoulders, and she knew there was no way to sugarcoat it. Before Michael disappeared, Rebecca began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. He was working on something extraordinary. A project that had the potential to change the world. What kind of project? Tyler asked, leaning forward. It was a clean energy technology, Rebecca explained. Michael called it revolutionary. From what I've learned, it could have provided affordable, sustainable energy on a global scale. He believed it could eliminate reliance on fossil fuels. That sounds incredible, Tyler said, a flicker of pride in his voice. So why did he disappear? Rebecca's expression darkened. Because Vince Carter got involved. Emma gasped softly. Vince. Rebecca nodded grimly. Vince invested heavily in Michael's project. At first, it seemed like he was genuinely interested in its potential. But Michael eventually realized that Vince had no intention of using the technology for good. He planned to exploit it, to weaponize it or use it as leverage in his criminal enterprises. Tyler's fists clenched. So Dad tried to stop him? Yes, Rebecca said. Michael wanted out of the deal. He tried to cut all ties with Vince, but Vince doesn't take no for an answer. Michael must have known that Vince wouldn't let it go. Emma's face paled. He was running from him, wasn't he? That's why he disappeared. Rebecca nodded again, her jaw tightening. Michael didn't just walk away from the project. He hid it. The plans, the data, everything. Vince has been looking for it ever since. Do you think that's why he's after us now? Tyler asked, his voice quieter. Because he thinks we know where the plans are? Rebecca met Tyler's gaze, her own eyes filled with both anger and determination. It's a possibility. If Vince thinks you or Emma know anything about Michael's work, he won't stop until he gets what he wants. Emma looked at Tyler, her worry deepening. Then we need to be careful. We don't know how far Vince is willing to go. Rebecca reached across the table, placing a firm hand on Tyler's shoulder. We will protect you, Tyler. No matter what it takes. Tyler looked between the two women, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He felt a surge of pride for the father he never knew, a man who had tried to stand up to someone as dangerous as Vince. But he also felt fear. If Vince truly believed they were the key to finding Michael's plans, then they were all in danger. Across town, in a dimly lit office, Vince Carter sat with a drink in hand, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of his desk. Before him were files, photos, and a map with pins and lines connecting key locations. Leo stood nearby, shifting uncomfortably as Vince stared at the materials with an unsettling intensity. So, Vince began, his voice calm but cold. Rebecca's digging into Michael's past. Leo nodded. Yeah. Looks like she's trying to figure out what happened to him, and what you're after. Vince smirked, swirling the liquid in his glass. Good. Let her dig. She's doing half the work for us. Leo hesitated before speaking. But what if she finds the plans before we do? What if Michael actually told her where they are? Vince's smile faded, replaced by a menacing glare. Then we make sure she doesn't get far. Rebecca has always underestimated me. That's her weakness. Leo shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. And the kid? You think he knows anything? Vince's grin returned, colder than before. Probably not. But he's her Achilles heel. If Rebecca thinks he's in danger, she'll do anything to protect him. And that's when we'll strike. Leo frowned, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Are you sure about this, Vince? The cops are watching us. We're already on thin ice after the kidnapping attempt. Vince's voice turned icy. We don't back down, Leo. Not now. We're too close. Leo nodded reluctantly, though his unease lingered. As Vince poured another drink, Leo couldn't help but wonder how far his boss would go, and whether any of them would come out unscathed. Back at the apartment, Rebecca made a call to William Carr, her investigator, updating him on the latest revelations. William, she said, pacing the living room, I need you to dig deeper. Focus on Michael's work. Look for anything related to his clean energy project. Vince is still after it, and I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I'll see what I can find, William replied. But if Michael hid those plans, it won't be easy to track them down. That's why I'm counting on you, Rebecca said firmly. We don't have time to waste. When she hung up, she turned to Emma and Tyler. We need to be ready for anything. Vince is dangerous, but he's also desperate. Desperation makes people reckless. Emma nodded, though her expression remained worried. What if the plans are closer than we think? What if Michael left clues behind that we've missed? Tyler's mind raced as Emma spoke. He thought back to the old letter, the photograph, and the conversations he'd overheard. Suddenly, a memory resurfaced, something from his childhood he hadn't thought about in years. There's something, Tyler said slowly, his voice uncertain. I remember. Dad used to tell me stories about a place called the Sanctuary. He said it was his favorite place to think. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. The Sanctuary? Did he ever say where it was? No, Tyler admitted. But he always said it was a secret. A place where no one could bother him. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Emma. It's worth looking into. If Michael was hiding something, that sounds like the kind of place he'd choose. As the family prepared to follow this new lead, Vince's plans were already in motion. His network of spies and informants had picked up on Rebecca's every move, and he knew she was close to uncovering something important. Let her go to the sanctuary, Vince told Leo with a smirk. We'll be waiting. As Rebecca, Tyler, and Emma prepared to uncover the truth about Michael's work, they had no idea that Vince was 2 steps ahead, ready to turn their search into a trap. The search for answers consumed their days. Rebecca, Tyler, and Emma pored over every scrap of memory, every old box, hoping for a clue that could illuminate what Michael had been working on, and why Vince was so determined to find it. It was early one morning when Tyler stumbled upon something that changed everything. He was rummaging through a cluttered drawer in Emma's room, looking for a flashlight, when his fingers brushed against something smooth and solid. Curious, he pulled it out. The object was a worn black notebook with faded gold lettering barely legible on the cover. Michael's journal, Tyler read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. Emma appeared in the doorway, her breath catching when she saw the journal in his hands. She hurried over, taking it carefully. Her fingers grazed the cover, and she seemed to linger in a bittersweet memory. It's your father's journal, Emma said softly. I found it years ago when we moved here. But I couldn't bring myself to read it. It was too painful. Rebecca, who had been in the kitchen, walked in upon hearing the conversation. Her sharp eyes fell on the journal, and she immediately crossed the room. Emma, Rebecca said, her voice urgent. This could be it. This could be what Vince is after. Emma hesitated, holding the journal close to her chest. What if it's nothing? What if it's just his personal thoughts? And what if it's not? Rebecca pressed. If there's even a chance it holds the answers, we need to know. Tyler took a step closer. We should look, he said quietly. If Dad wrote it, it's because he wanted someone to find it. They gathered around the dining table, the journal lying open before them. The first few pages were filled with personal reflections, memories of Tyler as a baby, moments of doubt, and notes about Michael's struggles with Rebecca's expectations. But as they turned the pages, the tone shifted. The entries became detailed and technical, filled with equations, sketches, and diagrams that were far beyond Tyler's understanding. Rebecca frowned as she scanned the notes. This is it, she said, pointing to a series of intricate schematics. This is his project. The clean energy technology. Tyler flipped through the pages, marveling at his father's brilliance. But it wasn't until he reached the middle of the journal that something caught his eye. A passage was marked with a bold, red circle. The handwriting was shakier than the rest, as if written in haste. Never let this fall into the wrong hands. If something happens to me, the documents are safe with the moth. The moth? Tyler read aloud, looking up. What does that mean? Rebecca's face turned pale. She pulled the journal closer, her finger tracing the circled words. It's not a what, she said slowly. It's a where. What do you mean? Tyler asked. Rebecca hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. The moth, La Mariposa in Spanish, was the name of a cabin. A family vacation home we owned upstate. Michael and I spent our summers there when he was younger. Emma's arms crossed, her tone skeptical. Why would he hide something there? He hated that place after you two fell out. I don't know, Rebecca admitted. But it's remote, secluded. If he wanted to keep something safe, it's as good a place as any. Tyler's heart raced. Then we have to go. If the documents are there, Vince can't get to them first. Emma's brow furrowed. This doesn't feel right. If Vince has been watching us, and we know he has, he might already know about the cabin. Rebecca turned to Emma, her eyes blazing with determination. Do you have a better idea? We can't sit here and do nothing. If Michael's work is out there, it's our responsibility to protect it. Tyler spoke up, his voice firm. We have to try. For Dad. Emma sighed, glancing between Rebecca and Tyler. If we're going, we need to be careful. No direct routes, no patterns Vince can track. Rebecca nodded. Agreed. Pack lightly. We leave at dawn. As the family prepared for the trip, Vince Carter sat in his office, his phone pressed to his ear. On the other end, one of his informants detailed Rebecca's latest movements. She found something, the man said. A journal. Looks like they're planning a trip to a cabin upstate. Vince's lips curled into a smirk. The cabin, he mused. I was wondering when she'd figure it out. What do you want us to do? The informant asked. Follow them, Vince ordered. But don't move until I say. Let them lead us to the prize. Then we'll take it. Leo, standing in the corner of the room, frowned. You think they'll find it? They'll find it, Vince said confidently. And when they do, they'll hand it right over. One way or another. As the sun began to rise the next morning, Rebecca, Tyler, and Emma loaded into the car. The journal sat on Tyler's lap, his fingers brushing its cover as they drove away from Brooklyn, leaving the city behind. None of them spoke much during the journey, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. Tyler stared out the window, imagining what they might find in the cabin, and hoping it would bring them closer to understanding his father. But as they headed toward their destination, none of them realized that Vince's men were already on their trail, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The family's journey to La Mariposa would uncover more than they expected, not just about Michael's work, but about the secrets that had been buried for years. The next morning, the tension in the car was palpable as Rebecca drove toward the cabin. Tyler sat in the back seat, clutching the journal tightly, while Emma stared out the window, her fingers nervously tapping her knee. The dense forests surrounding the winding roads made Tyler feel as though shadows were constantly shifting around them. The sense of being watched was unsettling, though he kept it to himself. Are you sure no one else knows about this place? Emma asked, breaking the silence. Rebecca's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Michael never told anyone outside the family, she replied. And Vince shouldn't know it exists. The doubt in her voice didn't go unnoticed by Emma. Shouldn't isn't the same as doesn't, Emma said, her tone laced with concern. If Vince has been watching us, he might already know where we're going. We don't have a choice, Rebecca said firmly. If Michael hid the plans here, we need to find them before Vince does. Tyler shifted forward in his seat. And if he does know? What do we do then? Rebecca glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her jaw set. We'll figure it out. Stay alert, Tyler. That's all I ask. After hours of driving, the car pulled up to a clearing where the cabin sat, nestled among the trees. Time had not been kind to the structure. The wooden exterior was weathered and cracked, with moss creeping up the sides. The windows were fogged with grime, and the roof sagged under the weight of years. Tyler was the first to step out of the car. Despite the cabin's dilapidated state, he felt a strange pull toward it, a connection to his father, to the secrets that had been hidden here. He walked up the creaking steps and pushed open the door. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint scent of wood rot. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dim interior. The cabin was small and simple, its sparse furnishings covered in tattered white sheets. An old table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with books and trinkets from a bygone era. Tyler's flashlight passed over each detail, his heart racing. Emma and Rebecca followed him inside, their footsteps cautious on the creaking floorboards. Rebecca's eyes scanned the room, her expression unreadable. He always loved this place, she murmured, almost to herself. I thought he'd forgotten about it. Clearly he didn't, Emma said, her tone sharper. Let's find what we're looking for and leave. This place gives me the creeps. Tyler's flashlight landed on a small wooden box tucked into the corner of one of the shelves. He stepped forward, pulling it out and setting it on the table. The box was old, its simple latch rusted but still functional. He flipped it open with trembling hands. Inside was an envelope, thick with folded pages, and a small black flash drive. Tyler picked them up, holding them out for Rebecca to see. Rebecca's breath caught as she carefully unfolded the papers, her eyes scanning the handwritten notes and schematics. These are it, she said, her voice a mixture of awe and dread. The plans for Michael's clean energy technology. And these, she continued, pointing to annotations scrawled along the edges, prove what Vince wanted to do with it. He planned to use the technology for arms trafficking and mass surveillance. Michael must have realized what was happening and hid everything here. Emma crossed her arms, her expression grim. This is dangerous, Rebecca. If Vince finds out we have these, he'll stop at nothing to get them. We're not leaving without them, Rebecca said firmly. This is the leverage we need to take him down. Tyler glanced toward the door, a nagging feeling creeping over him. We should get out of here now, he said, his voice low. What if someone followed us? Rebecca nodded, tucking the documents and the flash drive into her bag. You're right. Let's go. But as they turned toward the door, A sound froze them in their tracks, the unmistakable crunch of tires on leaves outside. Then came the heavy thud of car doors slamming shut, followed by the faint sound of voices. "We're not alone," Tyler whispered, his heart pounding. Rebecca pulled Tyler behind her, her movements deliberate and protective. "Stay close to me," she instructed, her voice a harsh whisper. She grabbed the heaviest object within reach, an iron candlestick from the mantel. Emma, her face pale but determined, picked up a piece of wood from the floor. "Whoever they are, they're not getting inside without a fight." The voices outside grew louder, punctuated by the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Shadows moved past the grimy windows, and Tyler's grip on the flashlight tightened as fear surged through him. "What do we do?" Tyler asked, his voice barely audible. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the back of the cabin. "There's a cellar hatch behind the kitchen. It leads to a tunnel Michael and I used to play in as kids. If we have to escape, that's our way out." Emma nodded, but her focus remained on the door, her grip tightening on the makeshift weapon in her hand. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cabin, making them all jump. Rebecca Miller, a man's voice called, low and menacing. "We know you're in there. Let's make this easy." Rebecca's jaw clenched, her mind racing. "Stay quiet," she mouthed to Tyler and Emma. The voice came again, this time sharper. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. Hand it over, and no one gets hurt." Tyler's breath hitched, his gaze darting to Rebecca. "It's Vince, isn't it?" he whispered. Rebecca didn't answer. She stepped closer to the door, her back straight and her grip firm on the candlestick. "If you want what I have, you're going to have to come and get it," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. From outside, a low chuckle drifted through the door. "Oh, we planned to." The cabin's fragile walls were about to become the site of a desperate standoff as Rebecca, Tyler, and Emma prepared to protect Michael's legacy, and themselves, at all costs. The pounding on the door grew louder. Rebecca, Emma, and Tyler froze as the man outside shouted again. "Last chance, Rebecca," the voice called, sharp and filled with menace. "Open the door, or we'll open it for you." Rebecca tightened her grip on the iron candlestick and whispered to Emma, "Take Tyler and get to the cellar. Now." "No," Tyler said, his voice defiant. "I'm not leaving you." "Tyler," Rebecca started, but she was interrupted by the sound of footsteps circling the cabin. She turned toward the door, her voice rising. "What do you want, Vince?" The name hung in the air like a curse. The response came in the form of Vince Carter himself, his voice dripping with mockery. "Ah, Rebecca. It's been too long. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You have something that belongs to me." Rebecca squared her shoulders, her voice steady. "You've never owned anything that belonged to Michael. And you're not taking what he left behind." The door shuddered as one of Vince's men rammed it with his shoulder. "You're out of time," Vince said, his tone growing colder. The door burst open, wood splintering as Vince stepped inside, flanked by Leo and two other armed men. Vince's sharp features were lit by an eerie calm, his predatory smile widening as he spotted Rebecca. His eyes flicked to the bag slung over her shoulder. "There it is," Vince said, gesturing lazily toward the bag. "Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you walk out of here." "You're not getting it," Rebecca said firmly, her knuckles white around the candlestick. Tyler stood behind her, clutching the flash drive tightly in his fist, his pulse racing. Vince laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think you can stop me with that?" He gestured to the candlestick. "Rebecca, you're smarter than this. Give me the plans, and no one gets hurt." Rebecca didn't move. "Michael died protecting his work. I won't let you destroy his legacy." Leo stepped forward, his gun raised. "Boss," he said, his voice low, "they're not going to cooperate." "Obviously," Vince said, rolling his eyes. He turned to Tyler, his smile turning icy. "You've got guts, kid. But guts won't save you." Tyler, his voice shaking but loud, shouted, "You'll never get this." He held up the flash drive, defiance blazing in his eyes. Vince's smile disappeared. "Courage is cute," he said, "but power wins every time." Before Vince could take another step, the distant sound of sirens reached their ears. The men froze, their faces darkening as the wails grew louder. Vince's calm demeanor shattered, and he turned to Leo with a snarl. "You said no one followed them." Vince barked. I didn't see anything." Leo stammered, his usual composure faltering. Rebecca's lips curled into a small triumphant smile. I called Detective Parker before we left, she said. I knew you'd come. Vince's fury boiled over. You think you've won, he snapped. You think the cops can stop me? Better than you think, Rebecca shot back. This ends now. The first flash of blue and red lights cut through the forest, the screech of tires signaling the arrival of law enforcement. Vince's men panicked, retreating toward the door, but it was too late. Police officers poured into the clearing, their guns drawn, their voices booming commands. Drop your weapons. Hands in the air. Leo hesitated, his grip tightening on his gun, but Vince raised a hand. Stand down, he growled. We're leaving. But as Vince and his men tried to retreat, the officers moved in. The cabin erupted in chaos, a brief exchange of gunfire that ended as quickly as it began. One of Vince's men fell to the ground, clutching his leg, while the others dropped their weapons in surrender. Detective James Parker strode into the cabin, his sharp eyes locking on Vince. Carter, he said, his voice hard. You're done. Vince glared at Parker, his hands raised in mock surrender. This isn't over, Detective, he said, his voice dripping with venom. Not by a long shot. As Vince was forced to the ground and cuffed, he turned to Rebecca, his expression cold. You think this is the end? I'll be back. And when I am. You'll be rotting in prison, Rebecca interrupted, stepping closer. She looked him dead in the eyes, her voice low and unwavering. You will never touch my family again. Vince sneered but said nothing more as the officers dragged him out of the cabin. When the chaos subsided, Rebecca turned to Tyler, who was still clutching the flash drive tightly. She pulled him into a fierce hug, her voice shaking as she said, You were brave, Tyler. Braver than I could have asked for. Emma joined them, her hands trembling as she cupped Tyler's face. You're safe, she whispered. That's all that matters. Tyler looked up at Rebecca and Emma, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. Dad's work, it's still safe. We kept it away from him. Rebecca nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. We did. And now, we'll make sure it never falls into the wrong hands. As the police escorted Vince and his men away, Parker approached Rebecca. You did the right thing calling us, he said. Carter's not going anywhere for a long time. Rebecca exhaled, the weight of the ordeal finally sinking in. It's not just about Vince, she said. Michael's work, it's bigger than all of this. We need to figure out what to do with it. Parker nodded. We'll keep it secure until you decide. But for now, go home. You've been through enough. Rebecca glanced at Emma and Tyler, her resolve hardening once more. We're not done yet, she said. Michael's story isn't over. Though Vince was in custody, the family knew their battle wasn't finished. The truth about Michael's work, and the dangers it posed, was still unfolding. Back in Brooklyn, the weight of the ordeal at the cabin followed them like an unwelcome shadow. Rebecca, true to her word, handed over the documents and flash drive to Detective Parker at the precinct. As she watched him lock away Michael's research, she felt a strange mix of relief and lingering guilt. The evidence was more than enough to ensure Vince Carter would face a litany of charges, from conspiracy to kidnapping. But the victory felt hollow. You've done the right thing, Rebecca, Parker said, his tone reassuring. This will help put Vince away for a long time. Rebecca nodded but didn't respond. The question that gnawed at her wasn't about Vince, it was about Michael. She had spent years convincing herself she'd done her best as a mother, but now, those convictions felt paper-thin. Back at the apartment, Emma sat on the worn sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Tyler sat beside her, his brow furrowed as he stole glances at Rebecca, who stood near the window, lost in thought. The tension in the room was thick, but Tyler couldn't ignore the unspoken questions hanging between them. Grandma, he said quietly, breaking the silence, I need to know. What really happened to Dad? Emma flinched, her gaze dropping to her lap. Oh, Tyler, she murmured, her voice trembling. I've kept this inside for so long. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just too scared to face it. Rebecca turned from the window, her face pale. Emma, she said softly, what are you talking about? Emma looked up, her eyes glistening. Michael didn't just disappear, Rebecca. He knew Vince was dangerous. He told me as much before he left. He said Vince would do anything to get his hands on that technology. That's why he hid the documents. But he didn't just leave to protect the plans. He left to protect us. Tyler leaned forward, his voice urgent. What do you mean? Protect us from what? Emma's voice dropped to a near whisper. Michael knew Vince would come after us if he stayed. And he was worried about you too, Rebecca. He thought if Vince found out how close you were to him, you'd be a target. Rebecca's breath hitched. He thought I was in danger? She faltered, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting him by pushing him away, by keeping my distance. I thought I was giving him the space to build his life. But instead, I made him vulnerable. Emma shook her head. You didn't make him vulnerable, Rebecca. Vince did. Michael never stopped loving you. He was just trying to keep us all safe in his own way. Tyler listened quietly, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't know how to process the whirlwind of emotion swirling inside him. Grief, anger, and a strange, aching pride in the father he barely remembered. So all this time, he was trying to protect us, Tyler said softly. But no one was there to protect him. Emma placed a hand on his arm. Your father was brave, Tyler. Braver than anyone I've ever known. But he didn't want us to carry the burden of his choices. That's why he never told us everything. Rebecca's shoulders slumped as tears streamed down her face. I failed him, she said, her voice barely audible. I let him walk away when he needed me most. And now he's gone. Tyler stood and crossed the room, standing in front of Rebecca. He looked up at her, his hazel eyes filled with a determination far beyond his years. We can't change what happened, he said firmly. But we can change what happens next. We can do better, be better. We can be a family again. Rebecca knelt down, looking into Tyler's eyes. Her hand trembled as she reached out, brushing his hair back gently. You're right, she said. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Tyler, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. You don't have to earn anything, Tyler replied. We just need to stick together. That's what Dad would have wanted. Later that evening, as the three of them sat around the table for a quiet dinner, Rebecca cleared her throat. There's something I need to say, she began. Emma and Tyler looked up, waiting. I spent so much of my life chasing success, thinking it would make everything right, Rebecca continued. But the only thing that matters is family. I see that now. And I promise from now on, I'm going to put you both first. Emma smiled faintly, though her eyes were still clouded with worry. We'll figure this out together, she said. For Michael. For Michael, Tyler echoed, his voice steady. As they finished their meal, a tentative sense of peace settled over them. But in the back of their minds, each of them knew there were still questions left unanswered, secrets that could reshape everything they thought they knew. Across the city, Vince Carter sat in a holding cell, his hands cuffed tightly in front of him. Despite his circumstances, a cold smile played on his lips. You can't hold me forever, he said to the guard outside his cell. And when I'm out, I'll finish what I started. The guard didn't respond, but Vince leaned back, his smile widening. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As Rebecca, Emma, and Tyler tried to rebuild their fractured bond, the shadow of Vince Carter still loomed. And the secrets of Michael's life were far from fully uncovered. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into an uneasy rhythm. Vince Carter remained in custody, awaiting trial on a mountain of charges. Rebecca, Emma, and Tyler worked to rebuild their lives, but the specter of Michael's absence, and the secrets he had left behind, hung over them like a cloud. It was on a quiet afternoon when the next twist in their story arrived. Rebecca was sitting at the dining table, sorting through the mail, when her fingers brushed against an envelope that stood out. It was plain and unmarked, with no return address. She frowned as she opened it, pulling out a single photograph and a small note. The photograph made her heart stop. It was Michael. He looked older, his hair peppered with gray, but there was no mistaking the warmth in his eyes. He stood in front of a nondescript background, a busy street, somewhere far from Brooklyn. Rebecca's hands trembled as she read the note attached to it. He's alive. And he's safe, far from Vince's reach. Leave things as they are, and he'll stay that way. Rebecca's breath caught. The room spun for a moment before she steadied herself, clutching the photograph and note tightly. Emma. Tyler, she called, her voice trembling. Emma appeared first, a dish towel in hand. What is it? She asked, alarmed by Rebecca's expression. Tyler followed close behind, his brow furrowed in concern. Rebecca held up the photo. It's Michael, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's alive. The room went still as Emma took the photograph from Rebecca, her face draining of color. This can't be real, she said, though her voice betrayed the faintest glimmer of hope. "It's him," Rebecca insisted, pointing to the note. "And whoever sent this says he's safe." Tyler snatched the photograph from Emma, staring at it as if willing it to reveal more. His father's face, so familiar yet older, sent a wave of emotions crashing over him. Anger, confusion, hope, they all mixed in a dizzying swirl. "If he's safe, why hasn't he come back?" Tyler asked, his voice sharp. Rebecca hesitated, looking at the note again. "Maybe he still thinks Vince is a threat," she suggested. "Or maybe he believes staying away is the only way to protect us. That doesn't make sense." Tyler shot back. "Vince is in jail. He can't hurt us anymore." "Tyler," Emma began, but he interrupted her. "No," he said firmly, slamming the photo onto the table. "If Dad's alive, we can't just sit here. We have to find him." Rebecca and Emma exchanged a glance. Emma's eyes were filled with worry, while Rebecca's were tinged with guilt. "Tyler," Rebecca began gently, "this note. Whoever sent it clearly doesn't want us to look for him. If we do, we might put him in danger. And if we don't?" Tyler countered. "We just keep pretending he's gone? Keep wondering why he left us?" "No. I won't do that." Rebecca sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're right. You have every reason to want answers. But we need to think this through. If Michael wanted to be found, he would have come to us himself. Maybe he's waiting for us to come to him," Tyler said stubbornly. Emma reached out, placing a hand on Tyler's arm. "Sweetheart, I know how much you want to see him again. But we have to be careful. This could be a trap." Tyler pulled away, pacing the room. "What kind of trap? Vince is locked up. What else is out there that could hurt us?" Rebecca looked down at the note, her expression troubled. "We don't know," she admitted. "But Michael's been gone for years. If he's alive, there has to be a reason he stayed away." Tyler stopped, his fists clenched. "Then I'll find him myself," he said. "I don't care about the risks. He's my dad." Rebecca stood, her tone firm but compassionate. "You won't do this alone, Tyler. If we're going to find him, we do it together. As a family." Emma looked at Rebecca, her face lined with concern. "Are you sure about this?" Rebecca nodded. "We've spent too many years apart already. If Michael's out there, we owe it to him, and to ourselves, to bring him back." The decision was made. Over the next few days, the family began piecing together clues from the photograph and note. They scoured the background of the picture, searching for landmarks or signs that could indicate where it was taken. Tyler spent hours online, comparing the image to locations around the country. It was Rebecca who finally made a breakthrough. Late one night, she stared at the photograph for what felt like the 100th time. Her eyes landed on a faded sign in the background, a shop name barely visible behind Michael's shoulder. She squinted, then grabbed her phone and typed the words into a search engine. Her heart leapt when she found it. The shop was located in a small town on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. "I found him," she whispered to herself, tears welling in her eyes. The next morning, Rebecca shared the discovery with Emma and Tyler. Tyler's face lit up with determination. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Soon," Rebecca said, her voice cautious. "But we need a plan. If Michael's in hiding, we can't just show up and expect everything to fall into place." Emma folded her arms. "And what if we're walking into something dangerous? Whoever sent that note clearly didn't want us to follow it." Rebecca met Emma's gaze. "If Michael's alive, he deserves to know we haven't given up on him. I'm not turning back now." Emma sighed but didn't argue. Tyler, meanwhile, was already packing his backpack. As the family prepared for their journey, they knew this search would be different from anything they'd faced before. Vince might be in jail, but the dangers surrounding Michael's life, and his work, were far from over. And as they stepped into the unknown, they carried with them not just the hope of finding Michael, but the determination to rebuild the family they had almost lost. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for Rebecca, Emma, and Tyler, one truth burned brighter than all the rest. Michael was alive. And they wouldn't stop until they brought him home. This was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a journey of reconciliation, courage, and the enduring power of family.
If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.